If you have two different distributors, you have limited visibility, you have double the amount of SKUs, you have different pricing. So when I think about this, I'm really thinking the less complex stuff is the low-hanging fruit, in my opinion.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we will talk with Iliana Isherwood, supply chain sales executive with Cardinal Health. Hayes, I've known Iliana for quite some time. She'll probably put some numbers on that when we get into the interview here in just a few minutes. But she and I served on the board of our local regional arm chapter, CPAC, in southeastern Pennsylvania. I left the board a few years ago, but she has stayed on. I think her run has been over a decade now with that chapter. She cares a lot about supply chain, and today she's going to be talking about ways to build a pipeline of value with maybe some overlooked opportunities for cost savings that, maybe aren't the big swings of the bat, but certainly all totaled up can make a big contribution to the goals of the organization.
Exactly. She did a great job. And if you want to learn about KPIs, you want to learn about RBIs, you want to learn about Gary's past of being a college baseball player, you better stick on and listen to us today. Come on.
That is the name of this episode. KPIs and RBIs up next with Iliana Isherwood.
Bam!
Wow.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
My good friend, Iliana Isherwood, supply chain sales executive with Cardinal Health, joining us. We got a couple episodes left in this season, and Iliana and I have worked together for quite some time in our local regional arm chapter, CPAC, which is southeastern Pennsylvania, kind of serving Delaware, southern New Jersey, and southeastern Pennsylvania. That's the name of the chapter. And Iliana, you have kindly agreed to join us today. We're going to be talking about some under-maximized opportunities for cost savings. And so we'll kind of get into that. But what I like about this is we're going to be talking about building a pipeline of value today. So welcome to the show. And you and I know each other really well, but why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your history and why you love supply chain enough to be a board member of the CPAC chapter for over a decade.
Justin, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for the warm welcome. Depends on how far you want to go back, but I started my healthcare career about 14 years ago. I started in the purchase services role, selling healthcare textiles and linens. And it was there where I first kind of fell in love with the field and all its complexities that come with it. At about 2017, I came over to Cardinal. I had a brief stint in capital sales before coming back in my current role as a supply chain sales executive for Cardinal with responsibilities over distribution, products, services. And as you stated, I think about 2-3 weeks ago, you and I were trying to decide how long we've known each other. And we decided it's been 12 or 13 years. It's how long I've been involved with CPAC, which is my local chapter of ARM. I served in various roles. Currently as their secretary, I'm a active member of ARM as well. And I find a lot of value. I find a lot of value in the education piece and the connections that I've created over the years. And it's helped me with how I interact with my customers and the value that I try to bring through those interactions and those partnerships. So being involved, staying involved is my way of giving back.
So a lot of times, we're on these interviews and we're talking about the big picture strategy. And I think what I really like about, our theme for this episode, and Gary, you're going to love this because it's a baseball analogy.
Oh,
but
Lord. The whole time, is he going to talk about baseball now?
We're shifting quickly. It's all about, this conversation is all about hitting singles to score runs and still get the win versus trying to always hit, the home run or the grand slam. And so, Iliana kind of prepared for this and said, I've got, 4 or 5 different areas that I think organizations can hit some singles on. And also just thinking about how do you better leverage, newer or mid-level team members in your supply chain to help keep these initiatives moving forward, because it all adds up, right? At the end of the day, it all adds up. And so that's how we've kind of spun it into this creating a pipeline of value kind of theme. Is like, if you start to have a lot of these singles, they do add up, but you've got to have a pipeline. You've got a way to manage, you got to have a way to manage the pipeline. And so that's kind of what's going to be central to our conversation today. And Iliana, I appreciate you kind of putting these ideas together for us.
Yeah, definitely, Justin. And I'm not suggesting that the big picture is not important or those big projects are not important. But when we think about the pressure that supply chains and hospitals are under to save big dollars, they are a lot of times tempted to go after those really big deals that bring a lot of complexity. And multiple stakeholders that are involved, they can take months, sometimes years, and sometimes they don't come to a decision, they don't come to fruition. So it is very important to have kind of a pipeline of other ideas that we can fall back on and that will kind of help sustain until we score big on those big cost savings opportunities. So when I think about different ways, even outside of just simple product conversions. So you and I talked about the fact that these product opportunities sometimes are, the cost savings are predetermined because of GPO and existing contracts. So I've tried to think about other areas of opportunity. And one that I was potentially may or may not bring that up, but I decided that it's probably one of the more important ones. It's the process standardization. It's one of the more difficult ones to justify, but it's probably one of the more important ones to talk about. And when I talk about process standardization, is workflow optimization and reducing the touch points that are within our supply chains.
Can you give an example, and how that breaks things down?
I can give many, but the simplest one that I can think about is think about looking for proof of delivery. A nurse calls down into the storeroom looking for product that they should have received. Then storeroom is calling supply chain. Supply chain is calling the vendor looking for it. The vendor is calling supply chain back. Supply chain is calling the storeroom, and so on and so forth. That creates a lot of touch points, a lot of delay in having information when that information could be readily available in a vendor portal that you could easily adopt. When receiving could just log in and get the tracking and see, okay, this is coming FedEx 10 to 12, or it's already been received. Let me go back on the loading dock. By doing that, you're eliminating several touch points and you potentially have time to do other things.
So Iliana, I appreciate you talking about that. I think about dock to dock, if you will, like proof of delivery. They want it, they need it. We got to get it in the doctor's hands. It's not as simple as taking it and unpackaging it in a dirty room into the sterile room. And then how does it finally get into the mission of the hospital to serve our patients and support our staff. So I think you bringing that up is really good. You're not just talking about the price. You're not talking about the giant big wins. Yes, we're going to negotiate an agreement, a contract, but there's downstream effect, labor optimization, less steps, lean engineering, call it a 5S project. But I think as we talk about the Wade Boggs singles to get our runs in with the Boston Red Sox.
Boston just for me.
There you go. There you go, Justin, all day long. I think it's important to talk about that. Like there is so many pieces, Iliana, to your point. Like the POD is step one, right? I mean, you could write a 30-page document of a new employee of this is how it works to get to point A to point B. Current state, future state. Have you seen, I want to ask your opinion. We talk about the key stakeholders. We talk about who we're involving in the hospital to make that happen. It's not just one person. Like and from a high level, this has got to happen fast, right? It's got to happen fast. So there's so many people that need to be involved. You said the nurse needs this product. How do we get it point A to point B and quickly and efficiently? And how do you make sure you have a good agreement that has a post-implementation strategy that exactly what you're talking about gets point A to point B? Like, who are some of the key stakeholders? I'd like you to just maybe talk about that for our listeners.
It doesn't always happen fast. To your point, you have to kind of have the process established in the front end. And when I think about Justin's idea of leveraging your mid-level staff, it's very important for all of that to be set up in the front end. So for it to be set up in the front end, you have to map it out. You have to understand where the inefficiencies are to be able to cut out those inefficiencies and build it out in your contracts as KPIs in the front end and be able to trace that process, because it doesn't always happen fast, because we do a lot of our tasks are done on email. You may be waiting a whole day, 24 hours, 48 hours. Somebody might forget about an email until it just escalates to the point of, for many people to react to make it happen.
Let me digress a little bit. Let me just say, Gary, please tell us, you have a background in baseball. This is why it's so exciting for you. Can you just tell us, give me 30 seconds on that?
We're not going to talk about me pitching and giving up 440-foot bombs when I pitched it down the middle. So we're going to keep it on the hitter perspective and let Iliana hit these singles to get the runs in all day long. You don't want to hear about my career of giving up bombs out of the bullpen. So
when we say your career, we can't say what is your career? Successful collegiate career, right?
Correct. It paid the bills. I got a degree. So, so thanks, Hayes, but I appreciate that.
I'm trying to give you some flowers, so you can talk about how great you were. And so,
well, it's not about me, Hayes, but I think
really?
No, it's not. It's not. It's about Delaware and Iliana showing us how to be better production and labor optimization. I think I really go ahead, Iliana.
I don't want this to be a labor optimization discussion, because I do want to talk about how customers will realize the real dollars. But I did want to talk about this in the front end, because I think it's so important. When you're able to optimize your process and reduce that 30% that we're spending on repetitive tasks, you can properly allocate some of these other projects to your contract managers and really spend time digging in on how to get those real dollars. But to quantify for you what this optimization means, by eliminating some of these touch points, that could equate to 1 to 1.5 FTEs. And nobody wants to reduce labor. That's not where I'm going with this. We want to talk about how we can reallocate that to revenue generating activities. And I do want to touch on a couple other opportunities that equate into real dollars.
Let me ask about how to accomplish that process standardization, but in the context of these real dollar savings opportunities. I feel like with process standardization, you mentioned we can reallocate 1 to 1.5 FTEs into more strategic initiatives, right? Instead of just doing things that are very mundane, not very rewarding for the employee either, I might add. but it's a soft savings. And so it's one of those things that it's just like, if you go and say, let's put some energy into this, a lot of times it just gets backburnered, right? That's why those problems kind of, that opportunity still exists in many supply chains. Is there a way, I kind of think about how sometimes our laws are passed, we have this like major bill and then we throw all these little things, into the law that we vote on. And that's how we get some of the smaller ones done. Is there a way to take the process standardization and tack it on to some of these real dollar savings opportunities and make them part of it so that it just sort of like gets incorporated in how you're approaching something that is quantifiable? Is that a strategy you've seen leveraged or utilized?
I think, but do we really stop and map out what we learn through these projects? You really have to sit down and kind of understand the skill sets and the resources that are available to you and stop through some of these projects to document the actual process and the learnings, and how do you develop that in an SOP, right? So you may or may not be able to leverage team members, but there may be an opportunity to leverage your vendor for that too, because they may already have SOPs developed.
I'm thinking, what a great opportunity for AI. That's like what's occurring to me there, because you're talking about looking at the process and you talked about tracers, from an infection control standpoint, that's how they're evaluating how things are spreading, right? From whenever there's, like an outbreak. And obviously we went through that not too long ago, but that concept of tracers, I almost wonder if there's a way to do that in supply chain to identify those opportunities, but do that in a more automated way. All right, let's get to the real dollar savings. You've got a few topics here. We're going to run through kind of as many as we can. We've got non-acute spend, and this is in no particular order: vendor contract management, technology, and purchase services. So you pick where you want to start.
So you've been teasing us this whole time, and now you're going to hit us with the real stuff. Is that where we're going? Oh, now I got it. Okay.
Here's the Tony Gwynn singles coming.
Process standardization doesn't get any love. If you don't lead with it, it's the same thing. We're just perpetuating the problem.
So it sounds like doubles and triples are coming.
I gave process optimization as the last one in my outline when I spoke with Justin, but as I thought about this, I thought it was an important one to talk about. Let's take non-acute, for example. Non-acute is such a great opportunity. When you look at hospitals or IDNs, a lot of times there could be different vendors at play, different distributors at play. So kind of looking at the vendor partnerships, consolidating those vendors, getting real visibility into the formulary could present with a lot of savings. And to give you a percent, it's 15 to 25% of total non-acute spend, what you can immediately save by consolidating your vendors and standardizing your formulary.
Yeah. So Iliana, when you say formularies, in what categories? When I think about formularies, some people go straight to pharmacy. Some people go straight, like you can build formularies into coffee, purchasing coffee formulary. This is who you're going to buy from, or Granger, who you're going to buy from, or whatever entity you're looking at. So when you say formulary, maybe talk a little bit through that on maximizing that opportunity on your formulary. Maybe an example if you have it too.
I live in the med-surg world, so I'm just thinking widgets, right? You could have just general supplies. Instead of using two different glove vendors, there might be an opportunity to consolidate to one that is contracted. But when you think about, if you have two different distributors, you have limited visibility, you have double the amount of SKUs, you have different pricing. So when I think about this, I'm really thinking the less complex stuff is the low-hanging fruit, in my opinion.
So when you gather that information, I think about spend. Like you got to have a baseline. Like you're pulling your spend to go, who are we buying from? You got to have a baseline of that process we were talking about to actually move it from 5 vendors to 2 vendors, if so approved by value analysis, PPI, med-surg, whatever that looks like. How are you going about to ensure you're getting the accurate data to support your ask to move it forward?
Great question.
Oh, we got a great question. Oh my! All right,
Question of the night.
you have now made his absolute weekend already, and we're not even on the weekend yet. He is
Getting the
so
great
excited.
question comment is the grand slam
Is
of the Power
Is the
Supply
Gary
podcast.
Skinner Grand Slam, GSGS. Thank you, Justin. Please, Iliana.
I appreciate you adding that after I asked you to do that for him. Thank you.
Thanks, Hayes.
It's a great question because I think we get hung up on data. The first thing we have to identify is, do we have good data? And when we think about our item masters, how I see your head shaking your head. Is my item master clean? What is relevant? What is not relevant? So it's important to start with the acute formulary, a really good data person who can identify what's real, what's not real, and have been able to compare one to the other. What is real and what's junk? What needs to go? And yes, you do have to understand, am I even in a position to look? Am I in a position to consolidate? You may have to start small. You may have to start in pieces. You may not be able to do it all at once. Map out the process and have a plan. But you may be able to leverage your vendors as well to help with some of that data crunching piece.
It's a really good point, leveraging the vendors. I think that's so important to understand. We always ask them for their spend. I think, give us your 12-month rolling spend. What's it look like down to the detail so we can put it together. And if anybody knows their spend, it's our vendors. Because they got to report their dollars that they're making, or the end of the year, or they're going to look at a bulk buy. I think it's so important that you brought in the vendor. The vendor partnership, I think, is so important. And some are better than others, and some have better data analytics than others. But I think, if we don't have that spend, it's good to validate, right? Don't you think? It's like, we have our spend, but let's compare it to what the vendors have as well, just to make sure. We have so many ZZ items out. We've moved forward. That process, sometimes you're reinventing the wheel. So I really like the vendor discussion that you're bringing up.
It was a natural transition into one of the other topics for cost savings, which is the vendor management piece. I think having that relationship is so essential. I've noticed QBRs are becoming obsolete, and I believe it's because the customers are overwhelmed. They really want to see value in those interactions. So being able to kind of pick the top vendors to interact with, who are my strategic partners, but even leveraging the mid-level staff or the contract managers to be able to perform some of those QBRs. And the reason why I mention this is because if the relationship is adversarial or it's not there, you may not be getting the most from it. If there's transparency, the vendor will give more. They will be more willing to put a rebate together, help you stay on top of your rebate. Also, it's very important to understand what type of other value-added services. A lot of vendors are developing very quickly. They're branching out. There's different services as part of what they provide that are being offered. It's important to understand what else is out there that's a value add that you might be able to leverage within your organization.
I'm a huge believer in the business reviews, with the exception of, to your point, sometimes they just don't have any value, right? Like, here's our canned reports. Let's look at our canned reports. Okay, everything looks good, right? And it's kind of tailored in a certain way, and then it becomes something that it doesn't necessarily have as much purpose in terms of being really strategic about it, right? And so when you're doing it just to do it, I think that's when people are like, yeah, I don't need to be on that. I don't need to be on that. And I've seen a lot of health systems build KPIs into contracts, but those KPIs rarely translate very well into some sort of methodology for the business review. And I think that's like, I don't know if you've seen that as well, but I feel like that happens a lot. It's like on the front end during the sourcing initiative, maybe you do a conversion. You're like, yes, these are the problems we had. So this is what we want to measure for our KPIs. But then all of a sudden you're either not doing the business reviews after the contract gets executed, or the business reviews format is being directed entirely by the supplier. And this isn't meant to call out suppliers per se. It's just,
Sounds like it.
Well, listen, you're always going to show where you're strong, right? But I think it is incumbent on the health system to set some sort of agenda for what those business reviews should look like. And it should relate to the KPIs that they identified, not only in supply chain, but with all the stakeholders that might have been involved in that sourcing initiative through value analysis or otherwise, to make sure that you're still hitting on that. And I feel like there can be a disconnect there. I don't know how you feel about that.
I agree with you completely. The KPIs are established by us, the vendors. So it's very important that we are transparent as to why these KPIs we feel like are a measure of success. Is there anything else that we should be measuring? But those agendas, they need to be created in tandem, because we need to understand the strategic initiatives, the goals and objectives of those customers to be able to create something of value that's not one-sided.
Yeah. And the blind spots, right? I think it behooves the supplier to know what's important to their customer as well. So keeping it out in front, even if there's an area for opportunity, at least you're showing what initiatives or what steps you're taking to improve on that particular KPI area. But if you don't, and you're not transparent about it, that's usually when all of a sudden you find out that the hospital or health system is talking to one of your competitors, is because they identified an issue. And it's much better to be right out on the front of that. Hayes, I can just tell you want to say something here.
I can feel Hayes bubbling at the surface.
No,
I'm good. No, she's doing fantastic. Honestly, this is great. Yeah.
Did you do business reviews, Hayes? Did you do business reviews? Were you a big business review guy?
No, the only thing I would say is on the KPI side, what I hear as a gripe from companies sometimes is that you build these KPIs into these wonderful agreements that take, forever to create. But then the KPI you have to rely on somebody at the hospital to do something. It's an employees have to do certain things to make this whole thing work. And if those employees are resourced somewhere else or whatever, then therefore the KPIs are missed, right? The company doesn't get what they want. And that to me is I don't know how you build that in, because you everybody wants to come into this thing with the best case scenario. You want everything product, everything to be great. But if the company's relying on the hospital to add manpower or whatever to make it work, and they don't, then it kind of skews everything. And I think that's a problem.
The mutual KPI discussion is absolutely there. That's interesting. Typically, the KPIs are just measurables that benefit the health system, but don't necessarily speak to the partnership. Is that getting at what you're saying, Hayes?
Yeah.
It's like the KPIs are one-sided and they really should be mutual KPIs for measurement about how each party is doing in the relationship?
Yeah, clearly some of the companies we work with, that is their whole goal, is to have a mutual KPI of between the two, right? And that's the best one, right? The true partnership. But if a company is relying on the system to do something, and they don't, therefore you don't meet the KPIs. Therefore, your numbers don't look as good. The savings aren't as dramatic as they promised. All those things that could be in there, that creates an issue. Now, I'm not saying I don't know the answer. I think it's hard because everybody goes in under the guise of, God, this is wonderful. But once you get into it, a year down the road, and the two employees that were assigned to help do this or that aren't there anymore, it just changes things. So I think it's hard.
In my opinion, it goes back to that vendor reliance, really pushing accountability on those vendors as strategic partners to help you achieve those. There's a reason why those KPIs are there. They don't have to be one-sided. But everybody has to be really understanding well why they're there and why is it determined that they're a measure of success, and really pushing back on your vendor and your field team to make it happen and be your liaison with that clinical team or the staff on the ground.
I really like, Justin, I really liked your point when you brought up the blind spots. It's like once the agreement is signed, with that true partnership with the vendor and you have those KPIs in place. Do you feel like, Iliana, you're open to now? You're kind of in the house now. You weren't just in the foyer, just meeting and greeting and having hors d'oeuvres and hanging out. Now you're in the house. Now you're sitting down at the dinner table. Now you're really understanding the business. And then that's where they bring in all their key stakeholders on that KPI. To Justin's point, you hear on those calls other blind spots, so you may be able to fill those gaps. Do you feel like post-agreement, when we build that true partnership, you see more opportunities and you're able to be a resource even better post-agreement signature? Do you agree?
You have to be. Otherwise, you're a one-term vendor. That's how I look at it.
One-term vendor.
One term in the political environment. I like it. That's a nice little, we went from baseball to politics almost. I love it.
How do you make yourself different, right? If you want to be different, you have to be there.
You just got sent down to AAA if you're a one-time vendor. You're out of the bigs. You had your one shot. You just got sent down.
What did that feel like, Gary?
I don't know. I never was there. I never got
It's just not the big dollar contract you were hoping for.
Correct. And it has a 90-day out clause. Thanks for coming. You really didn't do your job. See ya. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm here to say I've been, in the industry now enough time to know that I will always be in this industry. As you indicated, the supply chain world is small. I want to make a difference. I don't want to be the same. And this is why I think about those things, and the relationships that I create, I hope that are lasting. They're not just a one-time deal.
Absolutely. And I think I can speak for Hayes, Justin, and myself, all being on the vendor side as well, and being exactly on the other side of supply chain as well, and seeing both sides of the spectrum. It is that partnership. And I'm going to say it again, Hayes, it's about mission. And if we forget about mission and patients and staff, and we don't think about that person on the table, that really what our focus is, we're missing the point. You do become, Iliana, that one-term vendor. I really believe that. And I can hear it in your passion and your voice. You're not going anywhere. You're going to be supporting this and really develop opportunities to support the healthcare industry. So love hearing that from you.
I think Gary just closed the podcast. But I'm going to give you, we got a couple of more minutes. I'm going to give you one. You had two left on your list. We had technology and purchase services. You can pick one and roll on that as we kind of, are nearing the end. But great job today, Iliana.
Thank you so much. Purchase services, I'll pick over technology, because once we get into technology, we could have whole another podcast. But purchase service is another hot topic. We talk about it, but are we doing a lot about it yet? There is a realization out there that there's a lot of cost savings to be had. 15 to 30% of total operating expenses are spent on purchase services. But the challenge there is that they're all different. So how do we pick what we go after? How do we go about it? And we really almost have to become mini experts in all the different areas. So let's take an example. We talked about my background in linen, for example. It's not uncommon for a health system or an IDN to have 3 or 4 or 5 different providers for linen services. So really understanding what is out there, what are the redundancies, the size of those contracts, and trying to somehow scale down. You could have somebody in acute, another person in non-acute. You could have rental services. You could have customer-owned inventory. So what is the intended use? Why scale those and eliminate those redundancies? You could say 5% minimum just from vendor consolidation and the purchase services. Minimum just from contract consolidation.
Wow. That's significant. I mean, when you look at using mid-level experience, right, instead of having to go high level. It's interesting you said something that basically alluded to the purchase services area is going to require somebody that has the drive or willingness to be a subject matter expert, because they are all so different. Do you kind of see it where you kind of you have a couple of people that you assign to a couple of different categories and just immerse themselves in it to be subject matter experts? Or do you think that it really needs to be led by somebody who, is a little bit more senior in the organization, but because of that seniority is able to pick up on these different areas faster?
It depends on how the organization is structured and the resources that are available. Most of the hospitals organizations in the U.S. are mid-size, 100 to 300 beds. So their departments are fairly small. When you talk about, 1,000-bed IDN, there could be a data team, there could be, a dedicated sourcing team, there could be dedicated contract team. So the biggest mistake I see in purchase services is that you just have one person assigned to purchase services. With a spend that accounts for such a large portion of the total operating expenses and the total spend, it can't be just one person. And if one person is all you have, you really have to find a way to prioritize. And again, it goes back to that process and workflow optimization, right? Identifying, where do I start? What are my top vendors? What are the size of the contracts? And where are my top opportunities? Because you can't focus on everything at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other quick tips on purchase services? I'm just realizing we really are up there towards the end of the interview, but anything else you kind of want to add to that? Maybe best practices or things to keep in mind to be successful?
Justin, are you saying we're in the bottom of the ninth?
Oh, way to pull that together, Hayes. We are. We're in the bottom of the ninth, but we're up 11-0.
Yeah, we're bringing in the closer right here.
Bring it in the lefty. Bring in the lefty, the natural. Bring it in.
Throw the heat, Iliana. Let's finish this out. Throw the heater, Ricky.
A flamethrower.
I think not to quote Ted Lasso, but stay curious. Having those vendor partnerships will really help understand what is out there, seek understanding. That is one of the most important pieces when you tackle purchase services, is really understand all the areas that service touches, what is it intended to do, and what it's actually accomplishing.
All right. Well, awesome job today. I love the baseball analogy. We milked it, Gary. We milked it just for you.
Milked it well. Thank you. Thank you. Go Sox.
But Iliana, you I don't know if you're a baseball fan, but you hung in there really well with us.
Had a very good at bat right there.
Yeah.
She worked the count big time, and she did a great job.
Yeah. All right, Iliana, thanks again so much. You mentioned maybe there's a future podcast discussion around technology. Let's keep that feather in our cap, and maybe we'll have you back on again in the future to dive into that area.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
That was Iliana Isherwood, Supply Chain Sales Executive with Cardinal Health, talking about under-maximized opportunities for cost savings, creating that pipeline of value through the lens of a baseball analogy that really just took off on us, Gary.
No, I thought it was great. Great, Jess. I appreciate the baseball analogy and coming back to my roots. So thank you for a little personal piece of that. But I thought she dove in well into some of those unmaximized opportunities in a myriad of different capacities. And you could tell her passion. She's really there and wants to be a true partner with the healthcare system too. And I think that's really important and what that looks like. So just kind of diving into it a little bit deeper of what we can do, and cleaning up that item master is always a difficult point, but there's all kinds of opportunities. She talked about the percentages in purchase services. There's always opportunities there, but just a lot of wealth of knowledge there. And she's got over a decade of experience. I think it was a really good podcast today, and really saw her passion come through.
Yeah, she definitely has a lot of passion for supply chain and puts a lot of her extra time away from her family and even her 3-year-old to invest in the local ARM chapter. I mean, she's really put a lot of energy into that. I would love to hear from our listeners on how they have been able to implement process standardization. Like we had talked about during the interview, it's kind of like one of those soft savings. Like, is there a way to leverage some of these other initiatives to identify that and bake it into your process? But like she said, a lot of healthcare organizations are looking for quick wins, and you've got to stop that process and document to really identify those opportunities.
Your baseline.
Yeah, I really want to hear how other organizations tackle that without overcommitting resources that really can't necessarily align with the financial goals of an organization.
And just to add on to that, Jess, I think Hayes brought up a really great point of talking about not putting the onus back on the healthcare system, extra people to maximize it. Like you can't look at maximizing that. It's got to be a true partnership. So I think that process improvement is huge.
All right, everybody. Iliana, great guest today. We've got one more episode in this season coming out next Monday, and then it's happy holidays to all of you. And on behalf of Gary Hayes and myself, thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply. Bam!
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.